Greetings and welcome. We are continuing our study by looking at the life of Jesus and the titles of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus and how that should influence our view of and vision of the church. We've looked at our role as peacekeepers. Now we are looking at our role in the realm of politics. And when I say politics, I mean specifically the politics of Jesus. That Jesus came and he used very political terms to describe his mission. He used words like kingdom. Even the word church itself in Greek, ekklesia, is a political term. It was a term that could be used of like a city meeting or something like that. Many of the words that are used and many of the things Jesus does, they're not simply about a private spiritual realm. They are things that actually impact the public. They are things that make an influence in the world around them. They're things that would often be considered to be political. And so Jesus, when he was crucified not because he taught religious teachings to people in church buildings or something like that. It's because Jesus claimed to be a king, and he claimed to be bringing a kingdom. And when you did that, that's the type of thing that gets you in trouble. That's the type of thing that Rome doesn't quite appreciate. So what we're going to do today is last week we discussed oftentimes in the Gospel of Mark, you can see Jesus perform a miracle, or he can cast out a demon, or he'll have a conversation with his disciples where something he does will point to him being the Christ. Or the disciples will flat out say, "You are the Christ," like Peter does in chapter 8. And Jesus will respond by saying, "Tell no one about this. Make sure that no one hears about this." He will sternly warn them. He'll even rebuke them. Don't tell anyone about this. Why would Jesus do that? And the reason that we gave seems to be something along the lines of when Peter calls Jesus the Christ, and then Jesus tells Peter that he's going to be crucified, Peter rebukes him for that. Why? Why would Peter rebuke him for saying that the Christ is going to be crucified? I mean, we look at the story of Jesus and we say, the gospel is found in the death and resurrection of Jesus. Like, that's central to it. And that's exactly the point. Central to our understanding of Jesus as the Christ, as the Son of Man, as the Son of God, is the fact that he was crucified on our behalf and that he was raised from the dead. And Peter does not believe that message, does not accept that message, and rebukes Jesus for that message. What that means is that Peter, while he has the understanding that Jesus is the Christ, has the completely wrong understanding of what the Christ is. What does it mean to be the Christ? And because of that, Peter's not ready to go out and to tell people about Jesus. Peter's not ready to go out and preach that Jesus is the Christ because he'll preach the wrong Christ. So what we're going to do in our class today is we're going to talk about what kind of Christ Peter envisioned. And many Jews, there wasn't one uniform view that all Jews had about what the Messiah was supposed to be like. But there was a dominant view. There was a view that many held. There was a view that was common among the Pharisees, and I think it was common among the disciples of Jesus, that the Messiah was supposed to be a powerful military figure who would destroy the Romans and set up a kingdom like King David. So looking at the history of Israel, you have King David, who sets up this united kingdom in Israel where they have wealth and they have autonomy and they are not oppressed by a foreign ruler. But then what happens since that time? You have the Assyrians who destroy northern Israel. After a civil war in Israel, you end up having the Babylonians who destroy southern Judah, and then the Israelites are finally able to return home, but they never have a king again, even though, by the way, God promised David that there would be a king, a son of David, who would be king forever. And so there's the idea that we're supposed to have this God-given king, and yet we don't have a king anymore, and we're dominated by Gentiles, whether it's the Babylonians or the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans. And so you look throughout their history, and they're longing for that return of a king like David. That king like David is called the Messiah. And some people had a view of what it would look like when that Messiah came. And it wouldn't look like Rome dominating and occupying the land. Rome would have to fall in order for them to establish their worldwide kingdom. And so when Peter says, "You are the Christ," it seems that that's what he's thinking. And Jesus says to Peter, "You're setting your mind on man's interests and not God's." He asked Peter, "What would it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his soul?" See, Peter's actually thinking that they're going to be able to gain the whole world. And Jesus is correcting that idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at three titles of Jesus that are given throughout the Gospels. We're going to look at the title Christ or Messiah, and just know that Christ is the Greek word Christos, and Messiah is the Hebrew word, and basically they mean the exact same thing. So Christ and Messiah mean the same thing. In the Old Testament, where the word Messiah is used, when it's translated into Greek, it's translated with the word Christ. And it literally has the idea of an anointed one, a chosen, anointed one of God. And so that's the first one we'll be looking at, Christ, Messiah. Second one is Son of Man. And then finally, we'll look at the term Son of God. So in discussing the Christ, one of the things I think is helpful to ask is, what did that word mean before it got applied to Jesus? So like, what were the Jews, when Jesus was a baby, no one was calling him, Jesus Christ at that time. What did the idea of him being the Christ, or what did the idea of Christ mean at that time? There are some Old Testament passages that talk about Christs, and one of the things that you'll see is that it's often applied to kings. I want to look at Psalm 2 for just a quick moment. In Psalm 2, you have this description of Inauguration Day, where God is establishing his king. And there are these Gentile nations who want to put a stop to it. And so Psalm 2:1 says, "Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed." That word, his anointed, right there is Messiah or his Christ. So God has a Messiah or his Christ, and the nations of the earth are plotting against him. And when the Lord sees this, verse 4, "He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them, and he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury." And he says this, "But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain." So the anointed one is the king that God established. And he's going to call him something else here in the next verse, verse 7. "And I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you." So the king is God's son, who is also God's anointed, which is a Christ or Messiah. So the Son of God, the King of God, and the Messiah, God's chosen Messiah, these are all going to be words that can refer to the same person. And so Messiah has the idea of kingship. It has the idea of being a son of God or the Son of God. We'll talk about that phrase here in a little bit later, but keep those ideas in your head. Because there was an expectation of what that person was supposed to do. In fact, there's a book, a collection of Israelite poetry. It is not in the Bible, although it kind of sounds like a book in the Bible, but it's called the Psalms of Solomon. And it was written just before the time of Jesus. And I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to try to think about what these words mean in relation to their view of the Messiah. This is a depiction of what many Israelites thought their Messiah would be like. And it says this, "See, Lord, and raise up for them a king." So the Messiah is going to be a king. "The son of David." All right, so he'll be a son of David. That's kind of what we talked about already. "To rule over your servant Israel in the time known to you, O God. Undergird him with strength to destroy the unrighteous rulers." So those rulers who are pagan and unrighteous, he will destroy them, and he'll purge Jerusalem from Gentiles who trample her to destruction. So the Gentiles who are in Jerusalem are supposed to be kicked out of Jerusalem. And then it says, "In wisdom and in righteousness, to drive out the sinners from the inheritance, to smash the arrogance of sinners like a potter's jar, to shatter all their substance with an iron rod." And then notice, "to destroy the unlawful nations with the word of his mouth." This is a message of God. We're ready for the Messiah who's going to come in here, who's going to be a king, a son of David, and destroy the Gentile rulers, kick all the Gentiles out of Jerusalem, destroy the sinners, and to destroy the unlawful nations. And then here's what he will do. He will gather a holy people whom he will lead in righteousness, and he will judge the tribes of the people who have been made holy by the Lord their God. And he will be a righteous king over them, taught by God. And there will be no unrighteousness among them in his days, for all shall be holy, and their king, notice this, shall be called Lord Messiah. So this Messiah, this Christ, he's the one who's going to come, destroy the Gentiles, and set up a righteous, holy nation that will not be destroyed. That's the picture of Psalms of Solomon, and it's a picture that's helpful to understand when Jesus enters the scene, because it's why it was so hard for the disciples to understand what Jesus was doing. So like when Jesus, after the transfiguration in Mark 9:9, tells his disciples, "Don't tell anyone what you've seen until after the Son of Man rises from the dead." The text then says, they seized upon this statement, wondering what rising from the dead meant. And you and I, we say, well, obviously we know what rising from the dead means. It means someone's dead, they come back to life, or something like that, or maybe they die and then they pass through death to the eternal life on the other side, maybe something like that. And the reason they had a hard time with that is because if they think he's the Christ, how is he going to rise from the dead if he's not going to be killed? It's like they're not thinking he's going to be killed. That's why when Jesus flat out says, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of sinners and they're going to kill him, Peter rebukes him. Or in Mark chapter 9, verses 31 and following, when Jesus tells them again, it says they did not understand this statement and they were afraid to ask him. And instead what they do is they talk about which of them is the greatest. Or in Mark chapter 10, they just flatly ignore it when Jesus says that he's going to be crucified. Why? Because they're not seeing how crucifixion fits into the story of Jesus. And so the word Christ did not mean person who gets crucified. Crucifixion was a way of saying you lost to Rome. There were other movements where people tried to rebel against Rome. That's not all that rare. That happened quite a bit. And what tended to happen was Rome would crucify the leaders of those movements, and that would put an end to the movements. People would either, if they saw their leader get crucified, they would either say, okay, I'm going back to my day job, and I don't want anyone to know I was a part of this, and hopefully no one finds out, and I can just quietly, secretly slink away and go do my own thing and live my life. That was one option, and that's usually how these little movements just kind of died out. Another option was you stay firmly committed and you say, okay, well, I need to find myself another Messiah. So you could choose like the next person in line, underneath the one who got crucified. Or you can choose like a relative or a family member or something like that. In early Christianity, after the crucifixion of Jesus, Christians could have potentially chosen Peter or something like that, or James. But they didn't do that. Do you know what they did instead? They made this remarkable claim that no other movement had made, which is that God had raised their leader back to life and his tomb is now empty and he lives forevermore. And that was a unique claim. That's not a claim that anyone was expecting. That's not a claim that even the Jews were expecting. Like, they didn't expect that of their Messiah. They didn't even understand what Jesus meant when he said he was going to raise from the dead, and they didn't understand what he meant when they said it was going to be killed. So why is it that they went around saying that? Because it seems to have happened. It seems to have actually happened, where he actually did raise and he actually was seen and his tomb actually is empty. And so now they have this brand new understanding of what the Messiah is supposed to be that doesn't match anything they had before. So before the death and resurrection of Jesus, it's really hard to see how he's the Christ and Messiah, especially as he is, or I guess I would say, after the crucifixion, it's really hard to see how Jesus is the Christ and Messiah. But then after his resurrection, they think he must be, but I don't know what this means. This is a whole new world. And so the teaching is kind of coming to terms with this brand new idea, but it does not match what they were expecting previously. This is another writing. It's called from the book Second Esdras. And it's actually discussing what the Son of Man does, which it calls the Messiah, in that Daniel 7 prophecy. How so in Daniel 7, you have these beasts that come from the sea, and they all represent successive empires. You have Babylon, and you have Persia, you have the Greeks, and you have the Romans, is how it's interpreted in the book of Second Esdras and by first century Jews. And so in this, you have a discussion of what the Messiah figure does. Because after those beasts come from the sea, there's one like a son of man who is chosen. And we'll talk about this in a minute. But the Son of Man is chosen. He rides on the clouds up to the one who sits on the throne, and he receives a kingdom and power and glory forever and ever, and all people of all tongues and nations honor and worship him. And so that's kind of what they're thinking their Messiah. You have all these empires and these beasts that roam and destroy, but their Messiah will be the one who destroys them. And so 2 Esdras 12, 31 and 30 through 33 says, As for the lion, who you saw rousing up from the forest and roaring, this is the Messiah. So like Jesus being the Lion of Judah, that's messianic imagery there. The lion that they saw is the Messiah, who will rise from the posterity of David and will come and speak to them. The them is the pagan Gentiles. And he will denounce them for their wicked ungodliness and for their wickedness. First, he will set before them First, he will set them living before his judgment seat, and when he has reproved them, then he will destroy him. So it's like he will become king, and then all of the other ungodly nations will appear before him, and he will judge them and destroy them. And guess what? It actually says a little bit before that, when talking about who will appear before him, it talks about that fourth beast of Daniel 7, who would be interpreted as Rome. And it says, this fourth beast is the fourth kingdom, which appeared in the vision to your brother Daniel. It shall be more terrifying than all the kingdoms that have come before it. So the idea of Daniel's vision is what's being discussed here, and the idea is that fourth beast is going to be destroyed. So if the fourth beast is going to be destroyed, and that fourth beast is Rome, then what's Jesus supposed to do to Rome? He's supposed to destroy Rome. How is he going to do that? Well, everyone's thinking he'll do it through military and warfare and all that. But you know what all of those other movements, those rebellion movements had in common? They all tried to beat Rome on Rome's terms. Meaning, Rome was really good at killing people. Rome had a really powerful military. Rome was, it was really hard to overpower Rome. But that's what they would try to do, and they all ended up failing miserably because of it. Jesus, however, is going to defeat Rome. He's going to defeat the powers of darkness. He's going to defeat Satan and all of the powers and empires and every wicked thing on this earth, not through force and through weapons, but through self-giving love on the cross. That, in the Jesus movement, is more powerful than anything else you can come up with. If you want to change the world, that's what changes the world in the eyes of Jesus. And I think you can look throughout history and you can see it's actually probably done a pretty good job at changing the world, better than most wars have done. And so Jesus, through the cross, is changing the world, and he's also changing the image of what Messiah actually means. Secondly, we want to talk about the term Son of Man. So Son of Man, we just discussed it already there in Daniel chapter 7. That's the most important passage for understanding this Son of Man language. And the Son of Man is actually the preferred term that Jesus uses for himself to identify himself. So if you're reading through Mark, you'll see that Jesus does not call himself the Son of God. Not saying he would deny it. In fact, he doesn't deny it. One time, towards the end of Mark, when he's on trial, he is asked, "Are you the Son of the Blessed?" And he says, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven." And so in that passage, he does say, "Yes, I'm the Son of the Blessed." But then he also adds to it the idea that I am the Son of Man. And he says, you'll see him riding on the clouds. That's direct language from Daniel 7. In fact, when Jesus is discussing the destruction of Jerusalem a few chapters earlier, he says, you'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds. That's again, he 2 times quotes from Daniel chapter 7. This passage in Daniel 7, which compares the Son of Man to the kingdoms and empires and beasts of this world, what it says about the Son of Man is, I looked in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue and language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away. And his kingdom is one, which will never be destroyed. And so, the Son of Man passage makes it seem like all of the kingdoms are out there roaming and all these beasts, but then they are going to be destroyed, and the Son of Man will be given this kingdom, and all peoples and nations and tongues will honor and worship him, and this kingdom will never be destroyed. So that's what many of them are looking for. However, and I think that's true, but they're expecting that to happen through destroying the enemies rather than dying for your enemies. And so that's one of the ways that these ideas get get confusing for people. But that's exactly what Jesus does. In fact, in Mark chapter 10, Jesus will do something that is unprecedented in the history of Israelite Jewish interpretation of the Bible. He will talk about the way that ruling is done in his kingdom. And he'll compare that with the way it's done in Gentile kingdoms. And he'll say, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles and the great men among them, they exercise authority, and they act according to their own will. They compel people. They use force. He says, but it is not to be this way among you. For with you the least shall be first, and whoever wants to be greatest among you shall be slave of all. And then he says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. The idea there of that passage is that in the politics of Jesus, things aren't done the same way that you see them done in the world around you. It is not through compulsion or through force or through might that Jesus reigns. It's through love and service. And notice what he says there, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. So he's combining the Son of Man language of Daniel 7. He's already been quoting Daniel 7. When Jesus is talking about the Son of Man, you should picture this Daniel 7 passage. But he says the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Who serves? A servant. So the Son of Man came to be a servant. And what does this servant do? He gives his life a ransom for many. Read through your Old Testament and try to find something about a servant who gives his life for the many. And what you'll see is Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53, this passage about this suffering servant. And what Jesus does is he says that Daniel 7, Son of Man, and that Isaiah 53, suffering servant, are actually the same one. That's something no one had thought before. Those passages were never read to be about the same person. People often discussed who it is that Isaiah 53 is about. Is that about Israel? Is that about some prophet? Who is that? But no one thought that was the same as the Son of Man of Daniel 7. Jesus is the first person, as far as we know, to make that kind of connection right there. And so how does the Son of Man receive a kingdom and receive glory and power, and all the nations will trickle into obedience to him? He does it through the suffering love of the servant of Isaiah 53. And so Jesus is doing something remarkable here. He is redefining what people thought about when they thought about the Son of Man. He's redefining what people think about when they think about the Christ. The Christ is the one who actually suffers for his people out of love. The Son of Man is the one who takes on the role of the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. And all of that is helpful to know when we start looking at some of the words used to describe Jesus. Now, the next word we wanted to look at, and the next phrase, was Son of God. And so what some people have tended to do is, and I think there is truth in this, but I think there's more than this, is they'll say, well, Son of Man it represents the humanity of Jesus, and Son of God represents the divinity of Jesus. So Jesus is fully man, he's fully God, and you can see that when you see Son of God, and you see that when you see Son of Man. But clearly there's more to the Son of Man phrase than just his humanity. Certainly that's what Son of Man tends to mean, human one, like a human person. But if you read Daniel 7, this is a human person who is brought up before God and given a kingdom, and all of the nations end up honoring and worshiping this one. And remarkably, this is the one who sits at the right hand of God. Like the Son of Man sits at the right hand of God. Think about what it means for the jealous God who doesn't want anyone else worshipped, who doesn't want you to go to other gods, who doesn't want you to trust in other gods, allows someone to share his throne room with him. Who would that be that God allows to share the throne room with him? It's the Son of Man. It's a way of saying he's not just a human. The term Son of Man itself has divine overtones to it. He's worshipped. He shares the throne of God in judgment. And so all of that is a way of picturing this Son of Man is more highly elevated than just a human person. But then that term Son of God, well, certainly I think it has connotations to the divinity of Jesus. And you can see that in John chapter 8. They want to stone him for calling God his own father and making himself equal with God. But Son of God is also sometimes used for human people. So, for example, Psalm 2, the passage that we discussed earlier, where the Christ is called the King, who is called the Son. Sometimes the King of Israel is called God's Son. You can see this in 1 Chronicles chapter 28. In 1 Chronicles chapter 28, you'll see God talking to David about Solomon. And God says, "Your son Solomon is the one who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him." And so in that, he's talking specifically about Solomon, a king, and says, Solomon will be a son to me, and I will be a father to him. So is Solomon a son of God? Sounds awkward to say it, but that's in the Bible. So the idea of being God's son is something that is sometimes applied to kings of Israel. David is called God's firstborn son in Psalm 89. And so you sometimes have this idea of the king being called the son of God. And that's why when Jesus says he's the son of God, or when people say he's the son of God, they sometimes think that means king. So in John 1:49, when Nathanael meets Jesus, he says, "Rabbi, you are the son of God. You're the king of Israel." Well, he uses those two terms synonymously to mean the son of God is the king of Israel. And so sometimes son of God can mean equality with God. Sometimes it can mean God's chosen, selected king. The king of Israel is God's son, who does the things that God does. He who tries to act like God. And most kings of Israel tend to fall short of that goal, but that is the idea of the language. You see this among Roman kings also, by the way. There were Roman kings who would claim to be God's son. Maybe not Yahweh's son, but the son of a god, or the son of one of the gods, or the son of their father, who was then deified. I believe it was Caligula who was the first Roman emperor who claimed to be God while he was still living and on the throne. But prior to him, you had emperors like Tiberius and Augustus, and then you had Julius Caesar, who wasn't technically an emperor, but was the dictator of Rome. But in each of those, after their death, they were then deified. So Tiberius, after Augustus had died and Augustus, his father, was deified, then Tiberius could become a son of God. His father was literally made a god in the eyes of the Romans. And so if he is his son, he could even put on the coins, and we have coins that say this, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. That's what it would actually have said on the coin that Jesus picked up and said, "Whose image is this?" And they said, "Caesar's image." It has a reference on there to him being a son of the gods, or a son of a god. You would see that on Roman temples. This is language that's used to describe Roman kings. It's language that's used to describe Israelite kings. It's also language that's used to describe Israel itself. If you look at Exodus 4, Exodus chapter 4, Moses is supposed to appear before Pharaoh to free the Israelites, and here's what he is supposed to say. It says in verse 22, "Then you shall say to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, let my son go, that he may serve me.'" So in this passage, who is the son of God? Israel is the son of God. And this language is carried over into the book of Hosea, chapter 11 and verse 1, when God says, "When Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." So the Exodus is described as God calling his son forth out of Egypt. Why? Because Israel is God's son. So taking all of this together, when you talk about Jesus and you call him the son of God, what does that mean? Well, certainly it means that he is equal with God. That's true of Jesus, but it's not true of everyone who's called the son of God. It also has the idea that he's the king. He's God's chosen king. It also has the idea that Jesus himself is the embodiment of what Israel was called to be. Israel was called to be this blessing to the nations, and Jesus embodies that and takes that vocation within himself as he goes out and he becomes that blessing to all the nations, as Jesus becomes the one who opens the door to even the Gentiles into the family of God. And so Jesus is the embodiment of Israel. He is the king, and he is the one who is equal with God. So all of that is a way of saying Son of God and Son of Man and Christ, they have very interesting meanings to them. And when you read the Gospel of Mark, you'll see all of these converge together. And the one picture that makes all of them most clear is the cross. It's the one that's the most confusing, but it's the one that gives you the most vivid depiction of what it means that Jesus is the Christ, that Jesus is the Son of Man, who suffers and bleeds and dies and is raised, and that Jesus is the Son of God. For example, the phrase Son of God. Mark chapter 1 and verse 1, the gospel begins, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And so you have this introductory line that tells you who Jesus is. He's the Christ, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And so you should be looking for things throughout the life of Jesus that teach you what it means to be the Christ and the Son of God. But the word Son of God actually isn't used too often in Mark. It's used only at key pivotal moments. For example, there are 3 times in Mark that Jesus is called the beloved Son. You have 3 beloved Son passages. The first is right at the beginning, Mark chapter 1, when Jesus is baptized, and this voice comes out of heaven. You are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased. The next time is at the transfiguration of Jesus, in Mark chapter 9, where you have a voice that comes from the heavens that says, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. And then the third time is in a parable that Jesus tells about a landowner who has rented out his land to certain tenants, and he's trying to get the produce from his land. They're not giving it to him, and he sends servants, and they beat and kill them. And then finally he sends a beloved son, and the beloved son is taken and beaten and killed. And so then he goes and destroys the tenants. But what you have there are these 3 beloved son passages, and notice the first 2 come from a voice from heaven, and the third one is one that pictures even the beloved son, who, if you've read the first 2 passages, you know who that is. The beloved Son is the one who's taken and beaten and killed. So even that term itself points to the cross. And then you also have sometimes the phrase Son of God is shouted out by demons, and Jesus will cast out the demons. There is a time when Jesus is on trial, and he is asked if he is the Son of the Blessed One. And he says, I am. And that, again, leads to his crucifixion. Because after he gives that answer, it says, what further need do we have of witnesses? You heard the blasphemies. Let's crucify him. That's the response that's given when Jesus claims to be the Son of the Blessed. But here's the interesting thing. Throughout Mark's gospel, Mark himself, the author, calls Jesus the Son of God. Demons shout out that Jesus is the Son of God. God himself from heaven says that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus does answer affirmatively on his trial when he's asked, are you the Son of the Blessed? But you know who the first human to actually call Jesus the Son of God is? The first time that message that Jesus is the Son of God goes from the spiritual realm, from God or the spiritual beings, to the lips of a person, someone who looks at Jesus and says, you are the Son of God. It happens one time in the Gospel of Mark. And you know when it is? The moment Jesus dies on the cross. There is a centurion who, seeing all that he has seen, has now seen the cross and can now begin to see clearly what these ideas mean. And when Jesus dies on the cross, I'll turn there. Mark chapter 15. Jesus dies on the cross. It says, and Jesus uttered a loud voice, and he breathed his last. And the veil of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. And when the centurion, who was standing right in front of him, saw the way he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. The first person in Mark's gospel to make that claim is the one who sees the crucifixion happen. The phrase Son of God is best understood by looking at the cross. The phrase Son of Man is best understood by looking at the cross. And the phrase Christ or Messiah is best understood by looking at the cross. But not just the cross, what then happens thereafter. The victorious resurrection of Jesus, which vindicates these titles, Christ, Son of God, and Son of Man. So what we'll do next week is we'll study what this actually means for us. These actually are political titles. What does that mean for us as members of a kingdom, as citizens of a kingdom? How should that change the way we view our Christianity? How should that change the way we view the world around us? In that, we'll start seeing how this all relates to a vision for the church. But thank you. God bless you, and may the love of God be with you.